Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Kelly Glover, who is the founder of the Talent Squad. Kelly, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as a guest on your show. I appreciate that.
You are welcome, and I always love talking to people that are on cutting edge and leaders in their industry, and I know that you specialize in booking podcast interviews for entrepreneurs, authors, and experts. So give us a little bit about your background, because this is not an industry or field of specialization that has been around forever and a day. It is something that is really gaining momentum, and so I would love to talk about what led you to this and what made you think, podcasting, I'm gonna connect up to this fast-moving industry and then help people succeed in it.
Yeah, well, I have a background in media. So I've been in media since 2001, and you might notice I've got an Australian accent, but I actually went to college in Ohio and did my internships in Hollywood at Miramax and interviewing celebrities. So I've got a background in film and ended up working at a talent agency and also as a radio announcer. So I was a syndicated radio host for a few years, which is very close to podcasting. Yeah. So my first, podcast was in 2007, and that was the radio show. We called it Pulling It Off the Logger, and cutting out the commercials and cutting out the music. That's what a podcast was then, and it was really, really complicated, actually. It was like 6 pages of how to get it all live and up on the internet, and even then, good luck if it actually worked. These days, click a button, upload it, boom, your podcast is live. So it's pretty amazing. So I got into podcasting in about 2013, and I've been running the Talent Squad, the podcast guest booking agency, since 2017. So really, it's an iteration of podcast producing and the booking.
Yeah, and was there an element of your transition into this field, the fact that you saw how radio and production and media was so well received, and then with podcasting, you do not need to go downtown to a studio. You don't need a huge amount of equipment. You can do this very, very mobile. And if you are a guest on a show, and that's what we want to get into, is how can someone, an entrepreneur, author, speaker, use podcasting? But is that one of the things you noticed, is that it's not only growing really rapidly, but it's something that's very mobile, and you don't need to have a lot of equipment in a brick and mortar building?
Absolutely. And I think the difference between radio, it's the barrier to entry. Yeah. So when I was on radio and a radio host, the only people that could be interviewed or have your own show are people that had public relations agencies, that were celebrities, that had a big media profile. But now anyone can be their own media house today or media production company. And it's really opened up niche programming, as opposed to, really broadcasting for the broad audience with broad topics to niche podcasting. So anyone can do it. As an example, I walk my talks. I'm on podcasts. I've recorded from New York. I've recorded from Los Angeles. I've recorded from Sydney. I've recorded from Atlanta. I take my little microphone with me, and I can record anywhere. And it goes the opposite for if you're a host as well.
Yeah, and I love that, and I think that and this might be just my personal opinion, but you hear all of these statistics about how video is, on the upward. I mean, it's the most, powerful medium, and I love video. I think it's wonderful, but this is just a small thing that really upsets me about video, and I want to see if you feel the same way or have had this happen. Have you ever been watching a video, maybe a webinar, and you're doing some work and you want to listen to it in the background, and you have your browser tab open up listening to this webinar, and then you go ahead and open up the other browser or go over to your Outlook or your email, and all of a sudden the video stops?
Yeah.
Because they have it set to not play what they want you to watch this. Well, most of the time, if it's just someone talking on stage or talking head, I don't need to see their lips moving to really appreciate what they have to say. And to me, that is where the power of podcasting comes in, because you're in between their cranium, in between their ears. You're listening whether you're running, walking, working out in the gym, driving. So I just really like that portability of that aspect as well.
Yeah, I think something that people are not talking about or thinking about podcasts is that people view an episode as a whole, like a book. You go to read a book from cover to cover. You go to listen to a podcast from beginning to end. Unlike a video where you might watch part of it, a blog post, you might read the headlines. But in podcasting, you'll hear people talk about it. Oh, I'm in the middle of a podcast episode. So if you're driving to work, or if you're making the dinner, whatever it is, how you listen to podcasts, if you start it, you're more likely to finish the whole episode than other media. And with it being 30 to 60 minutes, you're spending that time with one person as opposed to reading a quote and you're hearing the sound of their voice. Are they excited? Are they calm? You get to know the know, like, and trust factor, I believe, is expedited in podcast. So there's a lot of benefits in this medium that you don't get in other mediums.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that too many people think about, now let's transition into, why should I get booked on podcast shows? And it cannot be just any podcast show, but I think too many times people would say, great, I've got 3 podcast interviews booked for me in the next few weeks, and they approach it as, here's who I am, here's what I do, and my business does, and it's the same old thing about getting to know you, and that's fine and really, really good. But I feel like there needs to be a strategy involved in your podcast interview content. Do you ever work with your clients and say, okay, not only are we going to get you booked on the right show, but here's some ways to consider what to speak about on the show?
Yes, and that is actually step 1. So before you even pitch a show, this is even before you record the show, so you've got to pitch and get the yes. Before that, you need to have your messaging in place. You need to have your sound bites in place. And before that, it's who am I talking to and what do I want them to do as a result of hearing me on the show? So it's not about you. It's about the content and value that you are delivering, because they may not even know about you. So what are you teaching the audience? And to know that, you need to know what are their problems and what can you solve. So it's less about the person, it's less about the book, it's less about the business, and it's more about what can I help the audience with and what can they walk away with at the end of the show that they couldn't do or didn't know at the beginning of the show.
And I would submit to you that it should not be the top 27 things that they can do either.
No, and you need to break it down into manageable steps. And also, when you're pitching a show or going on a show, you need to think, okay, yeah, what do I talk about, but what does the audience want and what has not been spoken about? So if people are speaking, you're competing against the back catalog, so look for the white space. You don't have to speak about the same thing that everyone speaks about all the time. It's what is nobody else talking about but should be. So there are a number of ways to approach a show, and none of those are, about me as a person or my expertise or my history. It's about helping the people. Yeah, that's huge, because I think that a lot of people, I think that they mistakenly feel like, well, the purpose of getting on a podcast is to promote my business so I can, get away from as many, Facebook ads or Google ads or whatever is not working. And the tendency is it's all about me, but everyone's favorite radio station, and here's a good test for you coming out of broadcasting. What is everyone's favorite radio station? Everyone. The one. I don't know. Tell me. I don't know. What's the answer to this? Is this a riddle? I feel like it's like
this is a trick. I totally set you up. But here's you'll love this, and I guarantee you will use this example. Everyone's favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? Oh, yeah, you're right. I was going to say, if we can advertise, if we can air quote buy advertising space on WIIFM and flip around our message so that, just like you said, that audience understands what you can do to help their problem, but not from a me, I'm the best, but from a, hey, have you ever struggled with this? Isn't it really frustrating when whatever, fill in the blank with the problem? Boy, what we have found is there's some research and some of the things and misconceptions. And of course, what we do is we've got this real proprietary solution that fixes this, but you're speaking to the audience through the lens of their own ears, and they resonate with that because, of course, if you throw in a story, that makes it even better. But it's not about the experience your team has. It's not about your wonderful solutions. Those things are necessary and needed, but after you've already kind of penetrated through that sales resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that with podcasting and other media, it's not about going on the show and getting the sale immediately after. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. It's about building your credibility. It's about showing your expertise. There's so much more involved than here I am, buy my thing. And you know that in marketing, you hear all the time, like 7 touch points. Then you hear 30 touch points. Who knows how many touch points it is? But it's just one little drop of, here's this person, here's Mike, and he knows what he's talking about on this podcast. Oh, here's Mike again. Oh, there he is again. Yeah, okay, great. So he knows what he's talking about there. I've seen the blog post. I've seen the Facebook ad. I've seen him write an article. So it's touch point, touch point, touch point, touch point, touch point. And then also reverse engineer. When you see somebody, what do you expect from them? Are you going to buy something immediately? Probably not, but you're going to go into their ecosystem. You're going to cross-check and verify their website, their socials, maybe download some things. So reverse engineer your experience with others when you try to build your own media reputation.
100%, and I would even throw in some, kind of like a little bit of a advanced mindset that I would recommend, and let's see if you agree with this. When you have a client that you book on a podcast show, I'm sure you and your team gets this. Oh, XYZ podcast, you've got me booked on. Wonderful. How many listeners do they have? How many downloads do they have? And I would say, I don't care whether they have 2 or 2 trillion, and here's why. It's what you as an entrepreneur, coach, speaker, consultant do with that episode. And it's nice if someone hears it and calls you, but that should not be your only point. It should be the ability to take that piece of content now. You were spotlighted in a well-known, a good podcast, and you're talking about things that are relevant. And now you have something to put on your blog, your email, your website, your social media. Hey, I'm so honored to be on the blah, blah show. We talked about some really great things, including this, and this. Take a listen, see what you think. So it's your network that you're using it for. It's you staying in front of your prospects, your customers, your strategic alliances, so they go, wow, Tom is just out there getting it done. That was a good episode. I'm going to send that to my cousin who runs this business and might need them. What do you think about the mindset of, well, I don't want to go on that show. They don't have enough downloads?
Well, I would say, who are the listeners of that show? And if it's a niche audience and it's got 2 listeners and your ideal client is dentist and they're both dentists and your product is worth $1,000 or $20,000 and you can sell that person, I say, it's worth it. If you go on a giant show that has millions of listeners, they have no dentists listening, they've heard you, they're not going to buy your thing and they don't care. So I think you're absolutely right. And going on that show has elevated your expert status. It shows that you have influence. It shows that you're an authority in your field. And the 2 listeners that listen at the time of the download, well, that's not going to be the full downloads over the course of another 12 months, 12 months, because podcasts are evergreen. So I think it's about exposure. It's about exposure to niche audiences, engaged audiences, new audiences, and don't discount the relationship with the podcast host. Because the host could also be a potential client. You could do joint ventures. There could be partnerships. There could be affiliate deals. So sometimes the benefit of the relationship is actually the host of the show, not necessarily the audience. So you need to, like you said, it's mindset. And with regards to repurposing content, you've hit the nail on the head. There is promotion that you can do before the show even goes out if you've recorded. That's an opportunity for a screenshot and to tag the host and engage their audience before the episode's even been released. You can put it in your email signature. I could go on. I could give you 25 ways right now of how you can repurpose and showcase that content from that one episode. So I think thinking downloads it's a lost opportunity.
It's the tip of the iceberg. It's a relevant piece. It's a relevant metric, but it should not be the only thing. And too many people feel like it's the only thing. It's kind of like, hey, I just finished writing my book to get more business. I can't wait to earn royalties from my sales. Who cares whether you make $1 from the sale of your book? It's how you use the book to be seen as the authority to get new business. What your explanation there made me think of something else. What do you think about this? Knowing that podcasts are evergreen and knowing that you are positioned as an authority, I would recommend that that author, that entrepreneur, that speaker would think about what their ultimate purpose is, which is, of course, getting clients and making sales. Well, what are the top 5 to 6 to 10 really trigger points, touch points that their target audience must understand fully in order to make a buying decision for coming on board with whatever they do? And that's called the buyer's journey. Everyone has the buyer's journey, right? We have to research this. We have to understand that. And sometimes there's some really interesting nuances that you go, you know what? You've got some competitors out there, but I never knew this about your. That's a really good point. If you were to write down those 5 to 10 things, those deep questions, and have your response for each one of those, which as a good consultant or author or coach, you know those off the back of your hand. That's easy. Well, what if you strategically set the next podcast interview that you do, of course, after the intro, the pleasantries, and the overview, have that ahead of time, have that host be willing to really go deep on that one point so that then you can use that episode with your business development and say, hey, I was really honored to be on this one show. We talked about something really powerful, which is this. And you know that that's a really frequently asked or a really powerful question. And now you're able to use that in your business development to get new clients. And then that evergreen stays out there rather than just being all over the place. What are your thoughts on kind of strategically picking some content and sticking to that to use it kind of as a sequence?
Yes, I think it is staying on message in the interview, using your key messaging, and you're right. When you have an episode, if it answers a frequently asked question, if you send that episode to your prospects or clients that help them, they now have you in their ears for 30 minutes, and we already know that listeners listen to 86% of the episode. Sorry, that's not right. 86% of listeners listen to most to all of the episode according to Edison research. So you can use it in your own materials to prove that you are the expert, and then you're also promoting somebody else's show. So there's different ways to use it. And I think something that you said that was so important in there was the preparation. So if you have the questions, if you know what you're going to say, if you've boiled it right down and you've practiced the responses, you're more likely to get all your points out in a really well thought out way in episodes and package them up. So that is a really, really smart strategy.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of transition into if someone is listening to this thinking, you know what, I am tired of the same old whatever, fill in the blank with, the marketing flavor of the day that is not working for them. And I keep hearing about these podcasts. What is the best step for them when working with your agency? What is it that they should consider? What can you do to help expand and amplify their reach using podcast guest speaking?
Yeah, well, we call it the speaking gig without leaving your house. So that's another way to think of podcasts. You don't have to do the travel. You can do many more podcasts per year than you can afford to do speaking gigs. So first of all, you really need to go to step one and think, who am I speaking to? What do I want them to do as a result of going on the show? What's my messaging? What's my key messaging? And get all those assets in place before you either have us pitch you or pitch yourself. And that's a media sheet. That's an online press kit. That's having I would suggest doing a full media audit across, does your website look good? Are all the socials on there? All that in the preparation. And then what shows are you pitching? So you need to source and vet the shows. You might want to go on a show, but if the last guest was, Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk, you might not be in that league yet. Doesn't mean you won't be, but you might not be today. So you need to be mindful and realistic about the shows that you are targeting. And if you've never done interviews before and want to test the water, start out with the smaller niche shows where your audience actually is listening and hangs out and is already engaged, and get that media practice in first. So we call it practicing in private before you go public. So make sure you know what you want to do and get the assets in place. Make sure you're realistic about the shows you want to go on, and then practice before you go on the shows. So when you have that interview opportunity, everything you've said there, Mike, you're able to do absolutely seamlessly and smoothly. So you get the full benefit of being on those shows. So that's something that we work with you at the Talent Squad in doing. We understand not everybody has a budget for it, so don't let that hold you back. If you're not ready to outsource, you can pitch in yourself and do shows yourself, and then when you're ready, you can hire an agency to outsource.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really, really huge. And you said something really powerful that I think everyone needs to understand is it's not just this one thing as a standalone strategy, because you can do a wonderful podcast interview, and that audience could go, I love what they said. What's that website again? Let me head over there. Oh, wow. Are we in the 1990s still? So I think you need to have your branding, your website, all of these things in place so that when the podcast happens and they come to visit your website, it's congruent with that status that they heard from your interview.
The other thing is being tech ready, and you can do that on a budget for sure. So the mic setup that I travel with cost me less than $100. So don't let the tech scare you. You can get USB mics. The one I use is an ATR 2100. You can get that anywhere. And I just put that in my suitcase and take it with me. So I would say that make sure you have a good microphone and set of headphones. Because if you just use the computer mic, I equate that to showing up for a job interview wearing T-shirts and a pair of flip-flops. So
yeah,
you
right.
flip-flops. Sorry, we call them thongs in Australia, which is rude in America, and I always try to get it right. Yeah, so because all that the people have is your sound. Yep. So they are equating the way that you speak and the sound quality that you have with your quality as a guest and an expert. So make sure, I know there's this mentality at the moment of done is better than perfect, but when it comes to pitching the media, that is absolutely not the case. Because when you pitch, not only is the audience, after you've been on the show, going to cross-check and verify, so is the host. And you need to make your subject line to be clickable, otherwise they won't read it. You need to make sure your pitch is not copy and paste and that you're really, really targeting the audience. And you need to make sure your assets are great, like you said, so when the host and or producer goes and looks at you, that if they've spent that time, it's going to be a yes rather than a no. And
similar to what you just said, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And if that first impression is everything you just talked about, like how many times have you seen someone like, oh yeah, send me an email, it's mike@aol.com. And you're going,
exactly.
Is AOL still a thing? But definitely you haven't moved past. You don't own a business if you are using, something other than your website. So it's those little things that just scream, I'm not ready for prime time. So let's wrap up with this, Kelly. What is the best way that someone can reach out, learn a little bit more about your service, your agency, and connect with you guys?
Yeah, thetalentsquad.com. I would love for you to visit the website, thetalentsquad.com. Come and check us out.
Excellent, and I will make sure that is in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure. And I've looked at your back catalogue of shows as well, and there's some really good episodes in there. So I encourage, if you're listening to this, to go back. And Bob Berg, The Go-Giver, is a great episode that I listen to. So make sure you do that too.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.